My name is Andrew Stotz, and I'll be your host as we continue our journey into the teachings of Dr. W. Edwards Deming. Today, I'm continuing my discussion with David P. Langford, who has devoted his life to applying Dr. Deming's philosophy to education, and he offers us his practical advice for implementation. Today's topic is the role of support in intrinsic motivation. David, take it away.
Thank you. So we're working through 5 factors that lead to high levels of intrinsic motivation. And we started off with control, autonomy, ownership, however you want to think about that, but that's number 1. And then we had a discussion around that you have to develop levels of cooperation. And today I want to talk about the idea of support. So I'll never forget a kindergarten class of students was giving a presentation to a state board of education, and they were telling the state board about all the ownership they had in class and how they cooperated and how they did all these things and on their own, and they just knew what to do and had high degrees of ownership. And one of the board members said, "Well, if you're doing all these things, what's your teacher doing?" And without hesitating, I'll never forget, this little boy grabs a microphone and he says, "The teacher's not in the closet, you know."
My gosh, insightful.
Oh yeah, the room there's probably 300 people in the room at this state board meeting, and the whispers were just, what did he say? What is he talking about? See, he knew intuitively that he was being allowed to do these things and supported to do these things and to work together and have a real community in the classroom. And that just didn't happen by itself.
That's interesting because in that case, you sometimes would think, oh, the teacher's just, letting the class go free or something like that. But it takes a lot of work. I mean, just as you talked, I was thinking about how confrontational America is in the world. Here I am in Asia, and most people outside of the world do not think that America is a cooperative partner. In fact, people around the world oftentimes say, they don't know whether it's better to be an enemy or a friend of America. And, there's that just competitive, there's just not that cooperative. How do we work this out? How do we work together to get a better result for all of us? So continue on. Tell us more about support.
Yeah. So if you want to see more intrinsic motivation emerge, you need to take a look at what you are doing. And when you point a finger, there, what is it that's saying? There's 3 fingers pointing back at you. So yeah, what am I doing, and how am I managing in such a way to not have a high degree of cooperation or a high degree of performance in a group, And so there's some very key factors that I've learned over the last 40 years that will either hinder or help intrinsic motivation to come out. And the first one I want to talk about, how do you support people, is the area of feedback. So feedback versus evaluation. So, we always think that our job is to evaluate people, evaluate performance, evaluate a paper that you write, and I'm going to, give it back to you, put a grade on it, et cetera. People don't respect evaluation very well. There's just so many opinions in it, et cetera. Performance evaluations, Deming talked voraciously about getting rid of performance evaluations, but they do respect feedback. So when I'm in a classroom and I have an assignment, let's say it's a paper to write, and you hand it in, I could go through it, put red marks all over it, and then hand it back to you with a B- on it, and you'll probably just throw it in the trash can on the way out the door, and that's the end of it. But if we've gone over what a quality standard is for that paper and what it should look like to meet that standard, and now you hand that in and I start to give you feedback on it. And I sit down with you and I say, this paragraph doesn't quite make sense. I think you really should rework these sentences and go over this, and your punctuation's not quite right here. And if you make these changes, I think you're going to be very close to being there, to meeting that standard, right? Well, that's much different because I have a way to get out of my hole, right? But if I just have a B- on it, or C+ or whatever, there's no way for me to get out of that hole or to fix it. So it also brings into the whole grading thing. That's partly why Deming was so adamant about getting rid of grading in both corporations and schools, et cetera, because it just limits the masses of people trying to achieve a high level of quality in anything they do. So moving to a feedback system is extremely important to get support for intrinsic motivation.
And what do you say about the teachers and administrators and people say, yeah, but feedback takes a lot more time?
Exactly. So we have to think about things like that. If I'm having to spend way too much time giving feedback to people, it's probably because the upstream process wasn't very good. And I need to go back and look at that and see, wow, if I want to have fewer and fewer students needing feedback to get it to a high quality standard, I might want to look first at the process I'm using the explanation of the assignment, or how we went over it, or examples that I show people up front, or whatever it might be. But that process is producing the end result. If I don't like the result, don't blame the people. They're just part of the system.
That's it's interesting because I have a course that I've been teaching for a long time, and I have a lot of students going through it on a regular basis, and I can see the weaknesses when the reports are submitted, and then I go back and think, okay, how do we resolve this? For instance, I want them to write in a very clear format. I want 3 bullets. I want some supporting arguments. So when I started teaching that, what I did is I made an Excel file that had a limit. You could only type in a certain amount of characters. And I said, okay, your first assignment is to operate within this limit. And then what I did, David, was I created a macro that would take a picture of that in that student's Excel file. And I said, submit your picture to the group, and then let's discuss those. And once I then have them present 5 or 10 of, randomly call on students, present your ideas, very quickly, all students can start to see, oh crap, I see the weakness here. I wasn't that clear on this. And they start looking not only at kind of common principles, but they also see their weaknesses. And then that then goes back into my lecture as I revise it for the next group to say, okay, how do I make sure that they don't make those mistakes the next times? And that's one of the things about the manufacturing process that made Deming it's sometimes simple to apply in a consistent process that's just cranking away. How do we think about how we apply that in a classroom that we do, once a year, or once every semester, or once every term?
Well, one of the previous podcasts, we talked about the bell curve, or the histogram responses of somebody. So your job especially in education, is to not flatten the curve so that you have greater distances from top performers to low performers, but to actually sort of tighten the curve up so it's very tight. So what used to be top performance is actually being achieved by some of your lowest level students, and the top students are actually doing things that are just unbelievable, because the whole curve is much tighter between the haves and the have-nots, so to speak.
And are we also trying to shift that once we've tightened it? Then we have the ability to start to shift it to say, okay, what next level of output could we get with students, or something like that?
Yeah, my job is to see that the average performance goes up,
right,
overall, and the only way to get a higher average is for everybody to achieve, moving that up. So there's some other key factors that are critical for supporting intrinsic motivation. So the next one is what I call fail forward. So you're going to have to put people in a fail forward loop. So either you just didn't do the assignment at all, in which you're going to have to fail forward a lot, right? Because you have to produce something, or you produced something, but it doesn't yet meet the standard for high quality work. Well, I'm going to give you time to get it to that standard, because that's my job. My job is to see that you learn this material. My job is not to come up with sophisticated rating and ranking methods and spend all my time tracking that and figuring it through. That's not the job of teaching and learning.
Can
So,
you explain fail forward a little bit more? It's not something I've heard before.
well, when I have 5 children, and they all learned to walk, whether my wife and I helped them or not. But it was always great fun for us when they got ready to walk, and we knew they were standing up, and so I'd stand them up, and my wife would maybe get 10 feet away, and then she'd say, "Come on, you can do it." They don't really know what they're supposed to do or what's going on, but they're glad that we're both there supporting them learning to walk. But invariably, our kids would take about 3 little steps, and then they'd fall back on their little bums, and and so what did we do intuitively as parents?
Go pick them up. What did you
That's
do?
right.
Yeah.
Or we would applause or say good job, or right. But this doesn't happen in schools. My wife and I were both teachers, so we gave our children D's and F's on walking the first time around as motivation, so that they'd learn to walk.
You go in the corner.
Yeah. So when we look at some basic things like that, we realize, as part of the human condition, somebody that was actually grading the performance of a toddler walking like that, we would probably report them to social services or something. That just so dangerous. But why would we want to do that to them when they are in first grade trying to learn math, or they're trying to write an English paper at the high school level, right? We would want to have the same philosophy that, hey, you made an attempt. Your attempt wasn't quite reaching the standard yet, but you'll get there.
Right.
You can get there. And I'm here to support you. And my job is here that you, as long as you keep making these attempts, you're going to keep failing forward until you get there.
Right.
And then it's pretty amazing when you understand the neuroscience behind all this, right? Because we talked earlier about the control issue about time, but everybody's going to learn at different rates of speed and different time. And the more I understand that variability built into the time factor, I can manage a system so that more and more and more people are all achieving very high levels of performance. And that's my real job. So another area that I want to talk about under the area of support, how to use support in an environment of intrinsic motivation, is sharing. I just, over the years, just found that sharing is so intrinsic to people. So that's whether I have students just pair up with the student next to you and share, what did you do and how did you do it? And what did you learn from that experience, et cetera? Or all the way to, I have exemplary performance in my classroom by 5 students, and I'm going to give them a chance to share what it is they accomplished. Now, that's vastly different than me saying, I've got these 5 students, and they're all going to get an award for being most improved students in the class or something like that. Everybody else in the class has no idea how those people got there. So they intuitively will make up their own stories. Oh, well, the teacher just likes her, or he's a brown noser, or he's this or that, right? That's where all of these terms come from, because we have no idea how they actually accomplished this great thing that they did, because that wasn't shared properly.
Right.
And sharing is also a way that you can honor, people that have made breakthroughs.
Right.
And it doesn't always have to be your top performers, right? It could be somebody that really worked hard on something and had a big breakthrough. Is it as good as the top perform in the classroom? No, because I understand variation in the classroom. But
and you just said that somebody that went, what I was thinking about is somebody had a major breakthrough. But actually, if somebody follows the process of failing forward and they don't have a massive breakthrough, they're still going through the right process. And I was recently interviewing a lady named Annie Duke who talks all about, that the process is more important than the outcome in decision making. You may have had a good outcome only because of luck, but if you're improving your process of the way you're doing it, your probability of a better outcome over time is great. So even if somebody, having someone share their experience of failing forward and keep falling down, and how does it feel, and what is it that's motivating you to keep getting up, and because I want to do this or that, I want to, so that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about that.
Yeah, even inside of a grading system, when I started learning about Deming, I couldn't just stop grading students, but I could apply these methods and this thinking to have more and more and more of the students all do A work, right? Yep. So instead of like 5% of the students getting A's, could I get it to 20% of the students doing that level of work? And now can I get it to 50% of the students getting that work? And just like what you're talking about, it all has to do with the process of, what are we doing and how do we do explanations? Or maybe I shouldn't even be doing an explanation. It's just getting in the way of people.
Yeah.
And using that data to try to understand, is my process producing the result I want?
Right.
So in a classroom as a teacher, I have a process. I always taught my students, you have processes too, right? So if your processes are not getting you to the level, you maybe want to start talking to some of your colleagues and saying, hey, what are you doing? Or how are you going about that? Or how did you make that breakthrough? Right? Because they may have insights that you've never thought about before.
So if we look at these 5 key factors for a system of intrinsic motivation: control, cooperation, support, challenge, and meaning. Right now we're talking about support. And would it be about also you're creating a supportive environment, encouraging people to support each other and giving them feedback, and that's part of being in a supportive environment?
Absolutely. Yep.
So
that's why I keep saying it's a system of intrinsic motivation, because these are interrelated factors. And the more you think about each one of them and how it relates to the others, you become sort of a guru in the classroom that no matter who comes into your classroom, over time, you will start to see them more intrinsically motivated when you change that situation. So lastly, I would want to say that this takes a role change. It takes a role change, whether you're a teacher, administrator, a parent, a student. It's going to take a role change to think about working well with other people and cooperating, right? And sharing what I have. See, I can't, what we talked about earlier is I can't really share my great process if it's going to be a detriment to me, right? If there's going to be
my grade's going to go down on a curve. If it's graded on a curve, if I have this amazing way of really thinking about this particular topic, so I think I'll just keep it to myself.
Yeah. So, and we see this in really, big systems. I won't mention the name of the university, but I was working at a university and they caught 200 students cheating on electrical engineering exams. Well, in the investigation, not only were they cheating, this cheating cycle had been going on for 12 years. The students were passing down the answers to this professor's tests for 12 years, from generation to generation. They were actually being intrinsically motivated to share, to the next generation about what was going on. But, what they want to do? Well, they wanted to expel the 200 students that were caught cheating and all this, but without understanding, you created a system forcing people to sacrifice their integrity to get an artificial result because all the classes were being graded on curves. And so you're not going to get the grade you want unless you cheat.
Hmm.
And so the system is forcing people to do these defective behaviors.
And David, I have the most horrible response to that by the teachers or the administrators that you're telling, and they say, yeah, but we're preparing them for work.
I don't want those people working for me.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
But
We're preparing them to sacrifice their integrity when they come to work. Yeah.
right.
That's really what we want.
Disaster.
Right?
And it is, there's so much of that in the workforce. And so I think what you're talking about is so critical related to education, because if we can get these seeds planted right, I mean, we already know that people are, you've talked about it, that people are intrinsically motivated naturally. People are naturally wanting to cooperate. And if we can continue that cooperation and intrinsic motivation, at least they know in school, like this is the best way to get the best out of people, instead of whipping them like a horse, as an example. So maybe I'll wrap up. Yep, go ahead.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned horses, because I actually raise horses. But one of the things when people come to visit our horses and stuff, I have to explain to them that, we don't use whips and we don't use carrots and we don't give them treats, because you start to give a horse a treat for whatever, pretty soon they're biting somebody and they're trying to dig in your pockets. And again, defective behavior that I'm encouraging or I created. And even the horses have an innate sense of wanting to work and do a good job. And when they see that you're really supporting them, that's our topic today, supporting them and doing that job, they can achieve amazing things. So it even works with animals. So
yeah, that's a great point. And I know for anybody that's watched anything like the Dog Whisperer, the Horse Whisperer, and all that, it's all about, if you ever watched that show, The Dog Whisperer, with Caesar Milan, I think it is. Yeah. What you realize is it's all about untangling the mess that the adults or the people cause with these dogs. And it becomes even so says, clear.
He even says, I don't have bad dogs, we have bad people. So
yeah. And that's a lot of what we're talking about in the whole education space, is how do we, instead of focusing on the kids, focus on how we improve the system, because ultimately that's our responsibility. And if I just would share one last thing, it is that I remember going to my first Deming seminar. It was in 1990, and I was about, 24-year-old guy. I was working for Pepsi, and I saw a lot of the stuff that Deming was talking about. But man, when he turned and went after some of the leading managers in that room, and I wasn't one. I mean, I was a supervisor on the factory floor, and I heard that. I was like, whoa, that was a wake-up call to me to say, take responsibility. It is our responsibility to set this system so that there is, an intrinsic, motivation. So that just brought me back to that moment.
Yeah, any of us that ever saw Deming have great stories, but your story made me think about, I was at a conference with him one time, and an admiral got up and asked a question, and Deming said, we already covered that this morning. Where were you, in the parking lot? That was the Deming wit.
Yes, it could be biting. Well, let me summarize some of this now. Again, we've been talking about the 5 key factors for the system of intrinsic motivation. And today we talked about support. And one of the questions you kicked it off with is like, what am I doing to impede cooperation? How do you start to ask that question? You also talked about, the value of feedback instead of evaluation, and the idea that people respect feedback. And also you talked a lot about how we can think about like, what's the quality standard, and how do we give feedback? Is our quality standard clear? And how do we give feedback, but also adjust ourselves and our system of teaching to improve that? And also, I like the discussion that we had about the bell curve, because it is something it's abused. It's abused all the time around, the world. But you talked about the job is not to flatten the curve, but to tighten it. We're not trying to, get these extremely bad and extremely good outcomes. We're trying to get a more narrow, and then to try to shift that curve and that means that the average is going up. You also talked and you gave the example of a baby learning how to walk and failing forward. And part of support is creating a supportive environment where people are finally, the last parts we talked about was the idea of sharing, getting people to share their experience instead of awarding or rewarding them, having them share their experiences, not only of the people that have hit a particular milestone or whatever, but also the people that haven't done that. And then the last thing I think is really the big challenge for all the listeners and viewers out there, which is this: to be supportive takes a role change. It's about working well with others and helping other people to see how to share and work together. Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I'd say ultimately we want people to take risks, because if they're not taking risks, we're not going to have breakthroughs. We're not going to have new levels of learning in schools. And in order to take those risks, they have to feel like they're supported, whether it worked out well or it didn't work out well. If it didn't work out well, what did you learn from that? And it may be what you learned was, I'm never going to do that again. Okay, well, you learned something from that, right? But if they're in that highly supportive environment, you'll see their intrinsic motivation for learning and work come out at a level that you never thought possible before. I can guarantee it.
Wonderful. Well, on behalf of everyone at the Deming Institute, I want to thank you again for this discussion, David. For listeners, remember to go to deming.org to continue your Deming journey. Listeners can learn more about David at langfordlearning.com. This is your host, Andrew Stotz, and I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Deming: "People are entitled to joy in work."